Okay, I'd just really like to thank everybody for coming along this evening, to our invited speakers, and to Glasgow City Heritage Trust, who's supporting the Honour Streets protest and celebration project. It's now it was planned for last year, but it's now part of this bigger festival celebration year-long that we're having called Occupy, Occupy, Occupy. And it's celebrating the 20 years of the occupation of Govanhill Baths. Honour Streets is wanted to use the picket line, the 24-hour picket line outside the baths, as a starting point to explore why the street is so important for people, for protest and celebration. Originally, it was when Catherine Midgley, our Learning and Outreach Officer, was a volunteer, and we thought, oh yeah, let's have a nice exhibition of banners. But before we knew it, we were organising something much bigger. The banners are still very important. We've got an exhibition of them online, but they're part of that whole material culture of the protest. The banners, the T-shirts, the placards, the songs, everything around the protest, that they were all really integral to the whole event. So I'll just move on to my next slide if I can. Yeah, I'm just going to show you, just some images from that time. It was a really colourful, experimental, vibrant protest with lots of children from lots of people from all sorts of different communities: Irish, Asian, Australian. A real kind of coming together of the community to save the pool. And they had lots of interesting events. The picket line, people would just drop by and, stand around and chat for hours. And others, of course, were deeply involved in the rota and been up there at 6 o'clock in the morning or through the night. But they also had events at the weekends in the little peace garden that they created next to the baths, and also out in other parts of Glasgow, regularly at the City Chambers and occupying other Glasgow City Council buildings. Here they are, some of the protesters in town singing, I think it's the Save Our Pool songs, which they did at Christmas. We can maybe find out a bit more about that from Ray and maybe Fatima, because I'm sure there was Christmas carols, but I don't know those songs myself. So yeah, this is one of our iconic banners that is 20 years old, and it was just the campaigners, got some paint, got an old sheet and made these incredible banners, and they're just so iconic. And Helen, who's going to be talking a bit later from Glasgow Museums, she came out to the baths, and they're now in the Govanhill Baths archive, which I organise. She came out and advised us how to repair them, how to store them, so that we can keep using them and keep bringing them out. And we do that on a regular basis. People love to see these banners, they really do. It just brings back that moment. It's like tangible, it's textile, you can touch it, and they're still really colourful. As I said, this discussion and our film screening, our exhibition are all part of this bigger project, Occupy, 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 and all the details of that are on our website. So I'm not going to talk much more because I really think it's important to get on with our invited speakers. I'm just going to show you a little bit of footage from the time. And then we can go on straight on to Fiona Hayes, Dave Featherstone and Helen Hughes talking about the Banner Tales project. And then we'll go on to Rachel Dallas talking about her Southside anti-racism project. And then we can go on to Jonathan Charley. So I'm just going to start this video stuff right now. Okay?
Get your horn, you told the town. We don't want to go to Belarus. We want a full and a long way to Belarus, if the winds want to swim. And it's 3 miles to the Gorbals if you want to use the gym. Listen, Charley Gordon, get your honour to the till. We don't want to go to Belarus, we want a pool in Govanhill. Listen, I'm not wedded to the sound of Clydeside.
Thank you for the invitation to speak about the Banner Tales project. I'm Fiona, the Curator of Social History at Glasgow Museum, Strathclyde, and one of the Banner Tales team. I'd like to start with an overview of Banner Tales and then pass you on to some of my project colleagues. What's Banner Tales? Simply put, it's bringing together Glasgow Museum's labour history banners, those held by other organisations and in the community, with the people who made and used them, and people who are interested in the places, movements and protests these banners represent. This is, as we discovered, a powerful and often emotional meeting. The banners opened up discussions of social justice, grassroots organising and protests, both past and present. This has been a truly collaborative project, bringing in people from a wide range of backgrounds, occupations, skills and contacts. We set up initially with Glasgow Museum, Glasgow University School of Geographical and Earth Sciences, and GMB with Richard Leonard, then Political Officer. The Banner Tales events were about dialogue, sharing, questioning, validating people's experiences, and putting working class voices to the fore. The banners, with a huge visual impact and strong statements, became a catalyst. The events were recorded and music became a hallmark of a Banner Tales event. Many people contributed. I'd like to thank and acknowledge them all, but want specifically to mention Johnny Crossan as we look back over the project. As a PhD candidate at Glasgow University, he came forward with the idea of doing something around Glasgow Museum's labour history banner. So we began with a pilot project back in March 2014. This became a basis of a series of Banner Tales events in community spaces around Glasgow the following year, starting at Castlemilk on the 1st of May appropriately. These were supported by Glasgow Museum Open Museum. We then moved on to Bermullach. Each of these events, the banners reflected the area and the interests of the participants. And we ended the month at the Pearce Institute in Govan. The recordings became the basis of a booklet, Banner Tales of Glasgow, issued to the participants and becoming a legacy of the project. Since then, we've become part of that followed a series of standalone events. In June 2016, we were at Glasgow Women's Library to mark the centenary of the Women's Peace Crusade founded in Glasgow with an event around women and the peace movement. This was followed early 2018 at Scotland Street School Museum, part of the public programme for the Glasgow Asians exhibition, curated with Colourful Heritage. The event was about South Asians and labour organising. Later that year, we were at Glasgow Caledonian University Special Collections to discuss Glasgow and the anti-apartheid movement. This marked the 25th anniversary of Nelson Mandela receiving the freedom of 9 cities in Glasgow. These last 3 events become the basis of a forthcoming publication, Banner Tales, Diverse Voices Challenging Injustice, which will be published by the Scottish Labour History Society, the pandemic allowing.
Hi everyone. So I'm going to continue from some of the themes that Fiona introduced in relationship to the Banner Tales project. But given the kind of context of Govanhill Baths and the kind of the discussions around the kind of importance of the kind of street to kind of things like kind of politics, I'm going to think about how the Banner Tales project has kind of spoken to these sort of questions around the kind of space of the street and occupation. And to do so, I'm going to start with some extracts from going back to kind of work in the early days of the Banner Tales project, when I was working with my kind of friend Johnny Crossan, when he was based at the University of Glasgow, in association with the museums, and also Richard Leonard, back when he was a kind of GMB official. And one of the kind of banners that we looked at was that the banner of the Caterpillar factory occupation in Uddingston, that was occupied for 103 days in 1987 in protest against a kind of proposed closure. And this is an account from John Brannan, one of the key kind of figures in the occupation and in one of the unions involved in the occupation. And he's talking about the importance of the kind of banner in that occupation. So it wasn't just a kind of add-on to the kind of occupation, but it was really integral to the kind of symbolism, the kind of political kind of theatre, if you like, of that occupation. And you get a kind of strong sense of that here. So he notes that, see, January the 14th in Glasgow, 1987, the American company, that's Caterpillar, decided that firstly, they were going to close us. And that particular night, we locked the gates, didn't we? On that day, you announced that, we locked the gates, and we were then working and putting up a banner. There was a big roll of sheet for somewhere, it was about 20 metres long, and it said on it, Thatcher and Rifkin, then the kind of Scottish Secretary, say yes to 62 million, now a closure. Why? And I think this gives a sense of kind of two key aspects of the Caterpillar kind of occupation, the way the kind of banners were used as part of the kind of really assertive symbolism of kind of not just protesting against the kind of factory closure, but of occupying the plant. Also gives a sense of it kind of being used to kind of question what we might think of as the kind of moral economy of that closure, particularly because Thatcher and Malcolm Rifkin, in the kind of run up to the election of that year, had invested £62 million in the plant, which was then shortly afterwards closed by the multinational. And continuing, he notes that, and it was put on the outside of the Caterpillar factory, and the media picked up on it right away because of how simple that banner, how simple, and it was rough, but it said the right thing. So although we are here to talk about this banner, we had that banner, he notes, and when you get the BBC or the STV or whoever out of the archives, they always show that banner, always show it, and it's really important. And you can see the Bob Burrows and John Brannan and John Gillen who are kind of integral to the occupation here at the Glasgow Museum's Resource Centre, sitting in front of the banner. And you get a sense of kind of how even kind of 30, 40 years on, this banner is still something that kind of really is of kind of deep significance to them. So just to kind of finish off, I just wanted to kind of say a little bit about the significance of the kind of banners to the kind of space of the street. And I think this is really important when we think about what trade unions banners or kind of other kind of banners of political campaigns do. I think sometimes we kind of taught to think of things like banners as just a sort of reflection of values or kind of symbols of a kind of the labour movement or kind of political campaigns. But to use a term by the great socialist historian A.P. Thompson, I think we can think about how they play a much more kind of active role in creating what he termed an assertive kind of working class presence. So banners aren't just a kind of reflection of the kind of values or kind of activity of the movement, but rather they're kind of an integral kind of part of it. They shape the kind of culture produced through demonstrations. They shape the kind of way that a kind of left demonstration takes over the streets and kind of opens up a kind of different set of symbolism with a kind of different set of kind of values. So here we can think of how trade union banners shape particularly uses of public spaces, such as streets. And this is really important for shaping democratic cultures. If we think about the importance of unions in the kind of long protests to gain kind of suffrage, for example, these kind of unions have been part of kind of pushing at the boundaries of a kind of democratic culture for a very, very long time. And I think that's really important to kind of recognize. And also in that sense, I think we also need to recognize that these things are under threat at the moment. And I don't think the kind of current policing bill, which is going through the kind of Parliament in Westminster, is necessarily kind of relates to Scotland because policing's devolved here. But I think it still represents a kind of huge threat to the kind of right to protest and the kind of everyday kind of practices of kind of trade unionists or kind of other kind of political activists in using streets, using public spaces to shape democratic cultures and demands. And I'll just finish with one example of that. And that's the way that banners can be important in shaping solidarity in all sorts of ways. And in the in a publication that we've got coming out of the kind of Banner Tales project called Challenging Diverse Voices Challenging Injustice, which will be kind of which we produced and relate with the Scottish Labour History Society. One of the kind of figures who speaks in that, who's contributed to that kind of booklet is a woman called Suki Sangha, who at one time was the chair of the STUC Black Workers Committee. And she, in her contribution, talks about the impact that she felt of seeing kind of anti-racist banners from trade unionists on things like the annual St Andrew's Day marches, which is still the only annual trade union kind of anti-racist march in Britain. So I think this kind of speaks kind of to really sort of timely set of issues in the kind of wake of the kind of Black Lives Matter protests, and in terms of the kind of really difficult circumstances for political organising that the kind of COVID pandemic has wreaked on us. So I'm going to pass over now to Helen Hughes, who is going to talk to some of these kind of issues.
Hi, I'm Helen Hughes, Textile Conservator at Glasgow Museums. My job is to look after the physical needs of textiles, like banners, for the museums and to make sure they can be safely stored and accessed. COVID-19 and the resulting lockdowns have allowed time for reflection in many aspects of life and work. This has been happening in museums, and as in other areas, fundamental purposes are being questioned. In museums, this is producing a shift from talking about caring for objects to caring about objects for people. COVID-19 has accelerated the discussion, which began with projects like Banner Tales that reconnected the banners with their peoples. Banners usually come into museum collections after they have finished their working life or immediate relevance and may have become fragile. Banner Tales was an opportunity to bring out and use some of the banners normally too fragile to display. The Caledonia Railway Company banner was one of the most fragile. You might be able to see at the sides the long slits in the silk. Luckily, the slits are vertical rather than horizontal, so the banner could be hung for the Springburn workshop. During the lockdowns, people have been hanging banners and notices, including ones for the Govanhill Baths, on the gates and fences of Queen's Park. Last year, when I saw the banner alerting people to the plight of those in Camp Moira, I was reminded of the Springburn event and Stephen Clark, who sang there, changing his song choice to one about putting a light in the window to welcome refugees to Scotland, as the news broke about the deaths in the Mediterranean. Similarly, after the death of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement resonated with the Black and South Asian Workers Banner Tales workshop at Scotland Street School, and the discrimination suffered by those who participated. The Banner Tales project also included banners from out with the museums, such as the STUC Black Workers banner. The project was the result of considerable teamwork, planning, trust and respect for all of those involved. There have been a number of outcomes, including the forthcoming publication supported by the Scottish Labour History Society and the personal and organisational connections such as those with Paula and the Govanhill Baths, and being able to attend the panel discussion tonight. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rachel Dallas and I am the organiser of what is now called the Glasgow South Anti-Racism Art Project, a series of anti-racism murals throughout Glasgow South. I have long considered art one of the greatest forms of communication, and I'm a big fan of the 1980s Black British art movement, as well as just social political art in general. In May 2020, I decided to commission my first anti-racism art mural in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And when I reached out to local businesses looking for people to host the mural, I was pleasantly surprised to find that people not only wanted to host the mural, but also contribute to the commissioning of the mural. So I set up a GoFundMe, and I actually received more funding than I needed for just one mural, and was able to commission a series of murals throughout our community as a result. The overall aim of the project is to reflect our community's support of the Black Lives Matter movement, acknowledge racism in Scotland and therefore the Black Scottish experience, and to increase the visibility and representation of Black people in Glasgow, because I actually struggled to find any publicly accessible portraits of or murals of Black people in Glasgow before I started this project. So the first mural was located at Gulp in Shawlands, and the imagery that I chose was of a Black Power salute, which represents our community's unity and solidarity with Black people around the world who face anti-Black racism. The word written across the front is stand, which is taken from the phrase, "I will not always understand, but I will always stand," meaning that non-Black people do not need to understand our struggles to know when something is wrong and to take a stand. The second mural was commissioned at the popular Southside bar, the Rum Shack, and the owners of the Rum Shack chose a portrait of Benjamin Zephaniah for their mural. Benjamin Zephaniah is a Black British Jamaican political poet, playwright, novelist, musician, and more. His powerful and honest writing portrays the underlying seriousness of the experience of being Black and the reality of racism in Britain. In the portrait, he is accompanied by the Glasgow South Jamaica Street sign, which is named after a Scottish-owned slave plantation and reflects Scotland's significant role in the transatlantic slave trade. And the background art is actually taken from some album art of one of A Tribe Called Quest's albums. This mural reminds me of a Trojan horse because it's so beautifully painted by the talented artist King Listy. It's just fantastic to look at by itself, but it's also a difficult conversation in disguise. I also commissioned 2 murals of Black football players in the lane next to Joe Dandy's in Shawlands. The first one is of the world's first Black international football player, Andrew Watson, who not many people seem to know his name, and I wanted to increase visibility and acknowledge his importance to the Scottish football legacy. Andrew Watson actually captained Scotland in a game against England in 1881, where we won 6-1, which as of this day in 2021 is still a record home defeat against England. The second mural is of Pele, arguably the greatest footballer who has ever lived. So these murals to me represent the immeasurable legacy of Black footballers past, present and future. But it's also a reminder that football does have a racism problem and that Scotland has always been willing to accept the proceeds of Black talent, but not always Black people. The most recent mural that I've commissioned is located in one of the most diverse areas of Glasgow, so Govanhill, and it actually incorporates drawings taken from the Govanhill Youth Club that they were already drawing before I even approached them, so they were already looking for ways to support the Black Lives Matter movement. It's located outside the new Govanhill People's Pantry, and it depicts a child drawing, and it is accompanied by a quote from Ruby Bridges. Bridges says, "Racism is a grown-up disease and we should stop using our children to spread it." Bridges was actually the first Black child to attend a previously all-white 1960s Louisiana school, and she's also the subject of the 1964 Norman Rockwell painting, "The Problem We All Live With." This mural to me represents the importance of the younger generation in our fight against racism, as well as the impact of racism on children. My next mural is going to be a collaboration with the NHS, and it is going to highlight and acknowledge racial health disparities in maternal mortality. Now, of course, all of this art is open to interpretation, as all art is, and I'm really excited to find out what you guys think about the art, what it means to you, anything that you think the Glasgow South Anti-Racism Art Project should or should not be doing. Overall, I hope that these murals will be a reminder of the importance of acknowledging, discussing and challenging racism in our society, as well as a reminder of not only how far we have come, but also how far we still have to go. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, everybody, for their contributions there. I'm just going to change format. I hope everybody was able to hear and see the videos. I'm just going to ask Jonathan to share his screen and unmute himself.
Right. Right. How am I? Okay. Have I got to open up my PowerPoint here? Is that how you do this, Paula? I do apologize to everyone.
Jonathan, okay, I can open up this end if you want,
okay,
and then you can just talk to it.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. How about that? There we go.
Yeah.
Can you see
Brilliant.
that? Is that good?
That's great.
Are we good to go then?
Yeah.
All right. Well, first off, thanks everyone for asking me along. Well, in particular, Paula, who I've known for an awful long time. And sorry if I missed an email, which I probably did, not being very attentive these days, about sending a film in advance. So, and I think I probably missed a wee bit of a cue from Paula asking me to speak specifically about the street. It kind of is about the street, but I framed it rather more generally. So I've got 5 smallish points, and I shall try and stick to the clock, which I've got a terrible habit of not doing, about what it means to me and what Govanhill represents, I think, within a global context. So the first one is this, okay? And I was thinking, what is the single most important thing that I take from the Govanhill experience? We've also all got our personal stories. And for me, it underlines just this very important lesson of the latent strength of communities when mobilized collectively around struggles over resources and local infrastructure. To put it in other words, another world is possible, that we can begin to believe, and when we organize collectively, people can do extraordinary things. And I remember vividly that cathartic buzz on the very night when people were mobilizing, and as Paula said in the introduction, people from all ages, all ethnicities combining over a common cause. And I think this is profoundly important. And the reason why the famous picture of the rent strike is there is because that's another great triumph within Glasgow social and political history. I'm very conscious, having traced the history of the labour movement, of how many failures we have to our name, although some people would argue there's no such thing as a failure for people that were in a strike or in an occupation or out in the streets. It happened, even if later it got defeated. But Manuel Castells, the French sociologist, theoretician, argued, I think quite strongly, that Glasgow rent strike of 1914 is one of the few examples historically of a class struggle that led directly to a change in the law governing private landlords in this particular case. And something that we all know is so profoundly important to remember is the local community took the council on and won. It's a magnificent kind of like thing, and we've got a great history of that within Glasgow, as we know. The UCS, of course, is being another famous example, and of course the tractor occupation that David was talking about earlier on. So that's the first issue. The picture on the left, by the way, relates to an organisation as a cooperative that I set up with postgraduate students that we set up 20 years ago. We ran it for 4 years. It was called Glasgow Letters on Architecture and Space. And it was an agitprop organisation. We did educational workshops, outreach workshops, campaigning with people over housing issues. And in this case, as you can see, we managed to get this wee truck that we drove around Glasgow. And our first point of call, the day we actually launched our project, happened to coincide with the Govanhill pool. So that's the first one. Class struggle works, guys. Ha ha. Glimmer of Other Worlds is something that I use quite a lot. My background is within the history of architecture, within the history of city, and more generally within urban culture. And A Glimmer of Other Worlds refers to these little moments that we all know about, when things happened that opened up a different way of understanding the world, a different way of being within the world. So this is the second point for me. The Govanhill pool occupation, like all social movements, is explicitly spatial. And this is an important thing to remember. We're very used to talking about social history, about social movements, but these are always geographical. They're always explicitly spatial. So what does it point? It points to another way of being in the city and engages with architecture in a way that I think is really important in the sense of it's challenging what we understand by the idea of public and socialized space. So the pamphlet on the left, and by the way, for those of you that are interested in this field, Strathclyde University has got an immense archive, or did have, I think it might have been transferred to Caledonian, of these early pamphlets. As you can see, this one, with Willie Gallagher from 1919. But I draw your attention to the picture on the right, which is an actual fact Motherwell Public Library. And many years ago, I just did a tour around, and I used to talk about this with students. And I think back to the municipal architecture of the early 20th centuries, and imagine this. If, and this wasn't a Labour council at the time, and the Glasgow Corporation was in the hands of Liberals, and they decided to build a park, a library, a school, and a bar house, free at the point of a service, free to everyone. It's an extraordinary achievement of something that I think we should feel very, very proud. And in many ways, of course, it set the template for what went on to occur within the welfare state. And as we know from the pool and other closures, these are under threat. I mean, I live in Pollokshields, East Pollokshields, I have to point out, right next to the library, which is threatened with closure. And as indeed, I think Langside is. So, you know, we've had a occupation 20 years ago, as you probably know. There's loads of banners, talking of which, being hung up outside Pollokshields Library. So my fear is that these public, seriously, importantly socialized spaces that are free, accessible, communal and non-hierarchical are under threat, okay? And there's loads more that we could talk about, or I could go on about these instances, not only within Glasgow, but further and further afield. Next space. Well, I had to put this up because, yes, it is 20 years since the pool occupation. It's 150 years since the Paris Commune, which in my mind is one of the most important pieces of revolutionary urbanism to date. And I've spent an awful lot of time of my life looking at the history of Moscow, of Paris, and of Barcelona. You'll know the woman on the left, one of the petroleurs. making an important point, of course, that most social struggles, including the Glasgow rent strike, was led by women, okay? And so was the Paris Commune, and so was 1848. It's something that gets written out of history. So for me, the Govanhill Pool occupation, this is this third context, takes its place in what I call the long history of urban action that includes, in the first instance, just being on the street, okay? But obviously it includes marches, demonstrations, strikes, what I call the parallel history of architecture on the city. Now, not everyone necessarily will share this ambition, but on the horizon of this history, for me at any rate, lies the development of new building typologies and spatial practices that challenges the priorities of capitalist urbanization. And just so that you know, on the right-hand side is an original postcard that I bought for a bloody fortune when I was in Paris years ago of one of the barricades. And as was pointed out first by Marx and then by Engels, barricades unfortunately weren't very good when up against the modern cannon of the Prussian army and the Versailles troops who retook Paris, but as a piece of street architecture, they're magnificent. And as you'll notice on the back, that's where Napoleon got taken down as a symbol of imperialism by French workers. Incidentally, the Paris Commune, for those of you that don't know, ran anything from 6 weeks to 3 months. An amazing example. Imagine the Govanhill Pool, but urban-wide. An amazing example of self-management, of cooperative action. And so we go to lesson context number 4, which is this. You'll have heard the expression, the right to the city. It's become very, very popular and it gets bandied around. And I think it's a rather amorphous term, but it's kind of an important term. It suggests everything and in some ways suggests nothing. I mean, I've got a very specific definition of it, of course. And this is the fourth context. The Govanhill Pool occupation speaks out loudly about our right to the city. And for me, this is a trans-historical battle over land and buildings. What do we argue for? Well, it prioritizes social value over profit, okay? The interests of tenants over landowners, and articulates for me what is one of the most important questions of all, with what is the alternative to the capitalist city? You know, what is the alternative to the relentless commodification and privatization of our daily lives, from air to DNA to obviously the land and the streets in which we work on? So I just thought I'd share this one from my picture archive. The one on the right, it says, is the Faculty of Philosophy, which is under occupation when I was there. And I'm sure your Spanish is good enough to translate that. You know, the truth is always revolutionary. What is quite interesting, given what's going on elsewhere in the world with the rise of populist and authoritarian governments, is when the fascists kind of like started to approach Madrid, the apocryphal story goes like that. It said, well, where do we target first? And we go, we target the poets and philosophers. So they attack the University of Madrid. And even now, all over the philosophy department, and including the architecture department and medical facilities, you can still see the remains of bullet holes. And laughingly, it was said, one of the things, the book collections that kept a bullet was the collected works of Marx and Engels. So if you line that up in the window, as fascists were taking pot shots, you could be fairly sure that it wouldn't go all the way through the collected volumes. And the one on the left is, I spent an awful lot of my life looking at the history of the Russian Revolution, and particularly its relationship to the development of art and architecture. For several years after the revolution, they reenacted in the streets, in public squares, the storming of the Winter Palace. And as you can see here, they actually did this by extrapolating the painter Malevich's kind of artworks into 3 dimensions. So they decorated the front of the Tsarist palace with these extraordinary kind of abstract artworks, and then reenacted storming it. Wonderful little moment of which I can tell you more another time. So what is the alternative to the capitalist city? Well, it's the right to the city. We need to be talking about this and concretizing it. What exactly do we mean by it? And it relates very closely to the 5th context, which is this, which is the land is ours. And I've done a few things over the years, and I'm sure you'll know his book, Andy Whiteman, The Poor Have Who Owns Scotland, The Poor Have No Lawyers, about our right to the commons, and the global context of the Govanhill pool occupation, I think, is really pertinent as well, because all over the world, as we know, particularly in the Southern Hemisphere, but also in the North, but it's become such a pressing issue within the Southern Hemisphere about thinking and rethinking what we understand by the urban commons for the 21st century. So, I mean, I spend a lot of time in Brazil. In fact, I should be there now doing some work with social movements, the history of social movements, looking in particular about how they occupy and squat land. So the picture on the left is the Movimento Sem Terra, which is literally the landless movement. And they have now an urban equivalent called the Sem Tetos, without the roofs. And up the top there, it says, translating, we accuse the three powers, that's a justiciary, the Senate and the army, of impeding agricultural reform. So they marched en masse to Brasilia, which is the home of the Brazilian parliament, and squatted and occupied the kind of like whole kind of like parliamentary area. And then at the other end of it is this extraordinary phenomenon within Brazil, which is this place here called the Jardim do Paraguay. So I'm not sure whether this is the sort of urban commons we might be envisaging within the context of Glasgow, but this was a squatter city of 250,000 people. And when Paula said, Jonathan, make sure you talk about the street and not about, oh, I could talk about the history of the tribe called Quest, who I'm very fond of, by the way, Rachel, as well. But this place was home to 250,000 people. And it's a quirk within Brazilian law that the only public spaces, literally public, okay, i.e. that aren't privately owned in Brazil, that the public have the right to use without asking permission, is the beach, okay, and underneath kind of like motorway flyovers. So extraordinarily, here we have landless people from all over Brazil descending on Sao Paulo, obviously to look for work in the big industrial zones, building this city underneath. Needless to say, one mysterious night it got burnt down. So really, these are the five contexts that make me, what do I think of when I think of the Govanhill pool occupation? That class struggle works. It gives us a glimmer of other worlds, other ways of being in the city, other ways of thinking about what socialized public space is. It represents, you know, a small part maybe, but an immensely powerful chapter within the history of urban action, which for me anyway, represents the alternative history of architecture in the city. And asks us to start thinking about, well, what new type of building typologies could we imagine in a city that transcends kind of like that of the neoliberal city under which we all live and suffer. So yeah, what do urban commons mean in the 21st century? And lastly, yes, it's very, very closely allied to the questions and the struggles still, and I think within Scotland, about land ownership, but land ownership not only within an agricultural sense, but within the city itself. So that's my wee contribution to this evening. I'm sorry if that was, if I didn't read your messages, by the way, Paula, I tried. That's me done. Are we done?
Yes, that was brilliant, Jonathan. Thank you so much.
Was that 5 minutes? I wasn't. I was a bit more, maybe.
No, it was just really, really, really to the point and really interesting, and great to see Govanhill Baths involved in all that context. Oops. So now, I don't know if anybody wants specifically to ask any of the speakers some questions, or if people want to have a bit of a discussion. If Ray would like to say something actually about her involvement at the time of the occupation, or any other Sabre Pool campaigners that have joined the meeting.
Oh, thank you, Paula. I wasn't expecting to come and say anything because I'm pretty, it's actually pretty emotional from where I am. Very emotional when I see the the images, and it was such a good time. And to be honest, I have to say that the pool protests propelled me to go to uni, and I also sort of studied social movements, but in Maynooth and other things. So for me, it really empowered me. I learned so much, and it was great to see the community coming together, people talking, people discussing things. And yeah, but I just need a few moments to really now go back to remember some of the things that actually happened at the pool, because 20 years is a long time. And when you've moved countries too, it adds a bit of a different challenge on it too. And it's
were you involved in the, sorry, Ray, were you involved in the picket line?
Yes, I was.
Were you in the rota?
Was I in the rota? I can't remember. Yes, I was. Yes. I know I was on the, I spent a lot of time in the bothy, and I actually spent some time inside the building as well at the start too. So yeah, I was there at the start, and I was there at the Battle of Calder Street too. Yeah.
No, I think it's amazing to see even that short video clip outside the baths with Alistair Hewlett singing. Yeah. It's just so powerful, and you can, those songs, the Save Our Pool songs are available on our website, and I just love listening to them now. They're just so well written, and they're so passionate, and being sung outside every Wednesday night. It's just such a good tactic.
I remember the Wednesday. I remember the Wednesday night singing the songs, and do you know that it's actually pretty emotional? And I'm not used to crying, especially not in public, but I could at the moment cry. It's impacting my heart really so much. So, Fatima, thank you for those good memories. Thank you for empowering me. And I remember writing essays when I was at Maynooth on the Govanhill pool. So,
Well, I have to say, Ray, that's a fantastic story. I mean, I think that's inspirational in itself. I mean, what a tribute. If nothing else happened, the fact that it motivated you to go to university, got qualified and opened up. Well, there you go. There's a glimmer of another world. It's a fantastic example.
And now I tell stories. I tell people stories professionally. So that's, and when I was in Glasgow at that time, I was really in a very bad place. It wasn't a great place to be, but actually being part of that, being part of the community, actually doing the inner work that you do. Well, I did a lot of inner work through the campaign as well. It actually changed me tremendously.
Can I just say, yes. I haven't seen Ray for ages, so it's lovely to see you. We catch up on Facebook, but I hope you don't think this is patronising in any way, Ray, but I think you and me and so many people who are involved in that occupation felt a sense of power that we've never had before in our daily lives, that sense of control and unity. And I know Jonathan and others will probably know one of the sort of catchphrases of revolutionary socialists is that struggle changes people. You know, it just doesn't change the power structure in the sense that we're united fighting against the council and so on. But, you know, that the idea of going to work, coming home, feeding the kids, and all of a sudden we had a picket line, a 24-hour picket line, with people in the pool. We had police everywhere. We had to negotiate the street. We had to negotiate, you know, keeping that building ours. And all those little fights, I don't know if you remember, you know, gaining an inch of that ramp so the coppers couldn't get next to it. You know, I mean, that took planning, that took organising. It took women with prams. It took like elderly people refusing to move. And it was quite a exhilarating experience. But can I just say one thing that I think was really important that Jonathan's slide shows and all those banners is the role of art in struggle. And two things. Ordinary people make those banners. We make them, and not necessarily thinking we're creative. You know, we're not often told we're creative human beings, yet those banners are infused with the struggle, you know, in textile. It's an amazing thing. But art, both in our picket lines, but also in other struggles that we saw the images of, was a really great medium to be able to communicate with people, whether it was one slogan or whether it was pictures and so on. That was instant, you know, and it stood there and it made a point, but also could communicate with images and so on that you couldn't always do with language. And I think Govanhill being such an ethnically diverse place, it was really important those images could be read by everybody. And so you will see with ours lots of slogans, but lots of images like the shark, the swimmer catching the shark and so on. Anyway, nice to see you, Ray, and thank you. And I love
nice to see you, Fatima. And as soon as I can, when lockdown goes, I'll be coming over. And I'll say hi to you all.
Brilliant. I look forward to that, Ray.
Thank you. Put the kettle on, Paula, for me.
You can come and look at you can come and find your name on the picket rota.
Okay, right.
Yeah, one of the great things that I don't know if everybody knows, but the Govanhill Baths archive was set up in 2014-15. And I got the job for 18 days to do that. And the majority of the material in that archive was from the Save Our Pool campaign, because the campaigners knew they were making history. And if they didn't keep it, then nobody would. There's picket rotas. There's over 250 newspaper articles. That's just from January to August. There's you know, at least 2 or 3 articles in the Scottish press, in the Glasgow press, every single week. And it's just how that all works together, you know, the banners, the T-shirts, the picket rota, even the consultation documents, you know, that the campaign had with the local community, and the level of organisation, all those meetings, you know, there's a record of all that, and it is really important that it's kept in the baths. And, you know, when the baths reopen, the work's about to begin. When the baths reopen, you know, that'll be a publicly accessible archive again, and plus a museum. And just to say a wee thing about the banners, those banners have inspired Govanhill Baths Community Trust and the projects that it's doing now. There's been amazing, we did a Govanhill suffrage project a couple of years ago, commissioned an amazing banner. You can see these in the online exhibition. During lockdown, our Wellbeing programme commissioned this beautiful banner. Helen, you would love it. So people made a little square in their house and sent it in, and then an artist put it together to make this Govanhill Wellbeing banner. And then we had the Govanhill Queer project banner. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Catherine. That's an amazing, really gigantic piece of work that was made during lockdown as well.
Yeah, so I wasn't directly involved, but I do know a bit about it. I think that was in collaboration with Categoria's Books, the amazing queer bookshop in Govanhill. And I think that was done in a similar fashion where people could send in squares and then an artist stitched them all together. And it's just incredibly beautiful. There's a picture of it, I think also in the online exhibition, certainly on our website, there's photographs of it. And we are actually having a talk on Govanhill's queer spaces later in this celebration. But yeah, it's just an amazing celebration of the queer community in Govanhill at a time of great struggle, you know, and great difficulty. It was something to be, you know, to be really proud of, and it was on display, I believe, at the Deep End space for a wee while as well.
I think that's another thing as well, that I mean, I was in Govanhill 20 years ago and, you know, supported the campaign. I now live in a different part of Glasgow, and coming to work at Govanhill Baths Community Trust has just been amazing, because this area has changed so much. And I think that Save Our Pool campaign had something to do with that and the development of the trust. You're tripping over social enterprises on Victoria Road. I don't know any other part of Glasgow that's got what's happening in Govanhill. It's got a queer bookshop, it's got another bookshop, it's got a Scotland zine library, it's got the People's Pantry, it's, you know, Transylvania Cafe. It's just absolutely buzzing. There's music on the street and 88 different languages are spoken.
Well, there you go, Paula. You better get yourself back to the south side.
No.
Can I just ask one little question? I've been slightly out of the loop with it, but I'm conscious of the archive and the extraordinary stories. And it's a question of who owns this story. So it's good to hear that you're in control of the archive, because I've heard rumors of people wanting to make TV documentaries, some other people wanting to write books about it, because the problem is, like any successful story, especially any successful kind of like struggle like this, everyone wants a piece of the pie. You know, you can just see academics queuing up basically to write kind of like journal articles, you know, that in a way kind of like commodify this history, but for an academic purpose. So I'm just wondering what control there is over the archives and of the memoirs and the stories, for instance, like Ray's inspirational stories. And I've known Fatima. She probably doesn't remember me. You might do, Fatima. I invited you up to Strathclyde University about, oh, God knows how many years ago, to talk about it. So where does it go, and what plans there are to actually put together some sort of publication? Because I noticed that there is something going on, is there not?
Yeah, so at the moment, Catherine can maybe speak about, Bruce Downey's here as well. Bruce Downey, or maybe he's had to go. Bruce has been commissioned by the Baths to write a book about the history of the Baths. I'll quickly say what else is happening in terms of the celebrations for this year. So, you know, everything that's in Govanhill Baths Archive is, you know, owned by Govanhill Baths Community Trust. People donate things to the baths or they gift it. Later on in the year, because we want to organise a conference that's looking specifically at occupations, industrial, community, student and environmental occupations, with a kind of focus on the central belt of Scotland. So we're looking at Upper Clyde Shipyards, which is 50 years, Plessies, which is 40 years, Lovable in Greenock, which is 40 years. No, Lovable's Cumbernauld, Lee Jeans in Greenock.
There's one other
Park Complex. Sorry?
There's the ball bearing factory down the other end of Calder Street. Remember that? It was only occupied for a few days or few weeks, but they had a picture of Lenin above the workbench. That I remember.
Was that Weir's? Was that Weir's?
It was a long time ago now. Yeah. That's amazing, Paula. Right, okay.
Yeah. And also we're going to be working with this. I just really admire them. It's an organisation in Greenock as well. And I'm really interested in that whole kind of Clyde, what's happened to the Clyde and the communities on the Clyde. And they're called Magic Torch Comics. And they work, like they recently did a graphic novel about the 1820 radicals in Paisley. So they take historical stories and create graphic novels. So they're going to be working with Govanhill Baths to do a 4-page of the occupation in comic book form. And we're hoping to raise funds to actually produce a graphic novel which has all these different occupations in it.
Fantastic.
And I'll hand over to Catherine, who can say a little bit about the book.
Yes, so Bruce Downey, who was here, but I think he's had to go, is an author and a historian who published last year or the year before, Loved and Lost, Govanhill's A History of Govanhill's Built Environment, which is an amazing book, really cramming in a lot of history from the baths to the roller skating rink there used to be in Govanhill, to the many cinemas there were, the the tenements, the amazing tenements that we have in Govanhill. And that was obviously very ambitious to fit all that in one book. And now Bruce is going to concentrate on the story of the baths for his new book, which is coming out in August. So he had a sort of a memories gathering event back in February, speaking to people who used to work at the baths or were involved in the occupation, and he's very much still gathering those stories. So Ray, I don't know if Bruce has been in contact with you yet, but I know he would be interested to do so if he hasn't done already. And it's really looking at the entire history of the baths from the 19th century to the present day. So yeah, we're really excited for that to come out, and he's going to be giving a sneak peek talk about his book on the 24th of June, which will probably be in person, which is quite exciting.
Great. No, I was aware that he was writing something about the bars. I wasn't sure whether it was about the whole history of the bars or just about the context of the protest. Well, that sounds all fantastic. Look forward to it all. Great.
And Jonathan as well. I mean, this is kind of further down the line, but it's a project that we're working on called Govanhillians, and we're going to be looking at the community, the people that have made their home in Govanhill, the kind of surrounding area over the last 150 years, not just ethnicities like the Jewish, the Irish, the Italians, the Highlanders, more recently the South Asian and the Roma, but different kind of, so it might be nice to kind of collaborate with you in some way on that, because it you know, the street's just so important. And the tenement flat, we're going to do a project around the tenement flat, because that is the thing about Govanhill Baths. The streets haven't changed that much.
No,
in terms of the actual fabric. You know, compared to most other parts of Glasgow with the motorway and pulling down the tenements, you know, it really hasn't changed that much. The view up Victoria Roads from 100 years ago.
Well, talking about motorways, you could add this one. You remember the Pollock Free State? Oh, there was another occupation of the Pollock Park. That takes me way, way, way back now, which was almost successful.
Yeah, I think we're going to be doing something with that as well. And Danny, who's one of the campaigners here, with the baths, was also involved in that. Yeah, I'm just wondering, does anybody else want to have a kind of a chat about the banners and about Rachel Dallas's work? I just think these murals are absolutely amazing, that I've seen around Govanhill. I don't know if anybody's got anything else they want to add, or do they want to ask anything? I'm just thinking, Helen and Fiona, like, it would be really good to have a book of the banners that are in the Glasgow Museum's collections. I know this is probably like something that you've been talking about for years and years and years, but you know, I've got the one from Edinburgh that the City Arts Centre did, and it would be really amazing if we had that. You know, it's just so easy to be able to access the images, and the symbols are so powerful. When we were doing our suffrage project, we looked at all these banners.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something we've been discussing, and we have a long list at the moment. As you're probably aware, the borough collection and getting the borough reopening has been the priority for Glasgow museums. But on the list is to actually get exactly what you're asking for, and the fact that you're asking it is something, you know, we can go back and say, yes, there really is, you know, a real appetite and desire that we'll have a published catalogue of the type you're asking for, which will look at, you know, this whole history, because we have amazing banners, suffrage banners going back, you know, looking into the sort of early 19th century. Again, you just, you know, as Fatima was saying, these are people's expressions. These are the visual things that bring people together, and the demands are there. So there's that, yeah, we're definitely, and I mean, we've sort of, you know, with the Banner Tales project and the booklet and forthcoming publication, we do know this is something that people would like and are asking for, you know, and it is, you know, this is, you know, people's histories. So yeah, so thank you for bringing that up, because again, it's another point we can sort of raise to say, yes, this is something we should definitely be pushing forward, going forward with.
Sorry, someone was just trying. Catherine, could you send Alex Wild the link?
Yeah,
I don't think she's got it. She was going to try and join just late.
Also, Jim has his hand up. I think Jim has a question.
Hi, Jim.
Hiya. It was just follow on from what Ray was saying earlier. Hi, Ray. About the empowerment and how it changed her and she went on to do other things. Just to place it in context of where it happened, the end of the Govanhill Baths occupation was just a few weeks before 9/11. And a lot of the young people involved in the Govanhill Baths campaign, particularly the young South Asian community, immediately were politicised and immediately got involved in the follow-on campaigns from that, and were very active in 2003 in the Stop the War campaign. And it came from their involvement in Govanhill Baths. Prior to that, they hadn't been involved in political things at all. So I think that's a dead important thing about just like communities coming together. But I wanted to say about Rachel's murals and things, about the importance of murals, especially murals with very clear political messages. Is there is a Glasgow story about the Celtic fans' connection to Palestine, which has not sort of developed over the history of Ireland and the history of Palestine over years. It starts at a very, very specific point in the 1970s, and it comes directly from a mural and a wall in Belfast, which connects the two struggles. And so murals can have a massively powerful political effect. And I love the one in the pantry because I see that one a lot. And the fact that it's done by the youth club, and the youth club will put their clear, unequivocal message of support for Black Lives Matter. And I think it's a really powerful thing to see.
That one is one that Fatima helped me organise, actually. She's responsible for getting outside the Govanhill People Pantry. Yeah, and I think that one's particularly powerful because it reflects the voices of the younger generation, which is so important. So thanks.
Yeah, and I think, Jim, what you're saying there, so many children, babies, toddlers, young people were involved with that Save Our Pool campaign. All chalking the streets. They're all now like in their early 20s, and a lot of them still living around the area, and just amazing that Lorna McKinnon, who does Unite, Fight and Sing, we've got newspaper cuttings of her with a placard, and here she is coming on Sunday to sing the Save Our Pool songs in the Peace Garden across the road with Ando Glasso, the Roma musicians. So it's kind of bringing the new communities together with a young person who was involved in the campaign 20 years ago.
Wow.
I have a question for Rachel. I was just going to ask, there was a bit of discussion earlier about the importance of people writing their own histories and controlling their own histories, and I was just wondering whether you had in mind some kind of archive for the murals, because I guess, did you say one of them you used was, so I'm assuming it's not there anymore, maybe it was only a temporary one. So yeah, I was just wondering how you're thinking of recording them for history, because they're just so beautiful. Another really amazing thing, it was really just like really inspiring to see during the lockdown.
Thanks a lot, Catherine. I really appreciate that. Yeah, they developed really organically. So the first one was completely temporary because it was actually on the boards, the boards over the front of Gulp. So it was just supposed to be closed down during lockdown. So they're actually now in my house, those boards at the moment. And no, I've not actually decided how to record that yet. The project's still ongoing, and I've been learning a lot as I go. Like the ones outside Joe Dandy's, for instance, they're directly on the wall, and that means like I won't be able to take them down and preserve them. And you could say like maybe that was a mistake, but it's also a reflection of the fact that Black Lives Matter should be permanent, so it shouldn't really be something that you can take down and it's temporary and you can take it away. But you could say it's a mistake because it has been graffitied and I've fixed it several times, but then it continues to be graffitied. So yeah, the short answer is no, I've not decided how to record that. But it sounds like there's a wealth of knowledge here, some people I can link up with who might actually be able to help me with that. But it's still ongoing at the moment. Like I said in my video, I'm working with the NHS now on a mural to highlight racial health disparities in maternal mortality. And that one's got a lot more funding, and the plan is for it to be, you know, massive, like really, really big. So thanks.
And just a question, Rachel, because it was announced recently that not York Hill, Finiston was going to become this new mural zone of Glasgow or something like that. And you know, a pal of mine who lives there was just, who's an artist actually, was horrified, you know, at the prospect of all these murals appearing that has nothing to do with that community. And I think that it's interesting to look at. Like, there's two big giant murals at Partick train station because of the Commonwealth Games. That I'm not terribly interested in. But then next to the Annex Centre, there's these really nice public artworks outside. This is a community centre that was made by the community with tiles. And also under the bridge going down to Meadowside Quay, there's these amazing tiles made by an artist and young people, all about the history of the Clyde. So it's interesting how who's asking for the murals, who's doing them? Is it the community, or is someone coming in and putting something up?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's particularly beautiful when the mural reflects the community, and when you walk through and you can go, this community cares about this. I do think though, like if it's done right though, it could be really cool to have like a strip where you walk down and you think, wow, this is everything Glasgow represents, you know. But and there would always be debate about where should be the location for that as a centre of murals. So I think if it was done right, it could be really cool, but I do prefer the individualised community reflected art, to be honest.
We should just have 100% more public art, to be honest. I mean, I don't want to judge what goes up there because I think art should be judged by its own rules and so on. But we just need more art in the streets. It's devoid of. Glasgow should be full of art. Yeah, it's full of motorways and derelict buildings and so on. So more murals, Rachel. I like the idea of the big NHS one as well. So that's quite political in its own right, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it will be. Yeah, no, I'm hoping for more murals. I've got a lot more artists volunteering. To me, it's really important to me that artists are paid, because that's a bit of an issue for their time. But at the same time, if someone wants to be an ally of the Black Lives Matter movement and therefore they want to donate their time and the project pays for their resources, I also think there's a thin line, but that can be okay. So I'm hoping for more murals in the future, and maybe there's some more spots in Govanhill that we can cover. You're muted, by the way, Fatima, sorry. Good, thanks.
I was going to just ask David something. You know, I was just really inspired by the Banner Tales project, especially the publication. I'm not sure if everybody here would be aware of the little booklet that I'm sure you can get online.
Yeah, actually, we need to we've kind of run out of copies, and I don't think we've got an online. We've got it online. We should get it up online, and we've got another one. We kind of mentioned it in our talks, but we've got one, a kind of more detailed kind of publication coming out later in the spring. We're just looking at the proofs at the moment, and that's got a discussion of like seven banners, I think. So there's and that's going to be published with the Scottish Labour History Society. So there's a kind of the what we cover in it is there's a kind of the the Scottish Peace March banner, and we've got a woman called Maggie Sale who's talking about that, and some fantastic pictures of that. Actually, they kind of it's quite a bit bigger than the kind of first one we did, and then we've got three banners, three contributions around folk from South Asian heritage in Glasgow who've been involved in the labour movement. So Suki Sangha, who I mentioned in the talk, who used to be chair of the Scottish TUC kind of Black Workers Committee, and her contribution is really interesting. And she's talking about the Black Workers Committee banner, which is a kind of really striking banner, which I can imagine many of you will have seen on demonstrations. It's still kind of used. And then Isabel MacDonald did two really detailed and really valuable oral histories with a guy called Bob Chadder, who was a Labour councillor in Cumbernauld, but was very active around Glasgow West End in Labour in the kind of 70s and 80s. And then a guy called Gurdev Singh Pearl, who was involved in the RMT. And I think I think those oral histories are really interesting and kind of speak to both the kind of contributions of folk from South Asian heritage to kind of the labour movement, but also some of the kind of perhaps subtle exclusions and tensions. So they talk about how there wasn't necessarily kind of prejudice in terms of joining organisations, but they talk about the difficulties in getting nominated for positions and those. So I think they're kind of really rich testimonies. And then the final section is around the anti-apartheid movement in Glasgow. So we've got a contribution by a woman called Suganya Chetty, who was a key figure in the kind of linking between the ANC and Scotland. And she's talking about a banner which Glasgow museums have called which is about, I don't know if people remember the Seshaba festival that happened in 1990, which was a kind of big anti-apartheid festival, and kind of people like Governor Mbeki spoke at it. And so she's talking about that and some of the background to that. And then Brian Filling and John Nelson, who were the chair and secretary of the Scottish anti-apartheid movement, have kind of contributions as well. And one of Brian's contributions tells the story of the kind of renaming of the Nelson Mandela Place and how that came about, and some of the kind of politics around that. But there's also a kind of some really great pictures of the anti-apartheid banners, some of which are at the Glasgow Caledonian University. So we kind of did that in association with Carol McCallum, that section. So and it's going to be cheap. It's going to be out later in the spring. I'll let you know and kind of maybe circulate it. It's just going to be a £5, so it's not going to be a kind of, but hopefully hopefully it will be of interest to folk.
Yeah, no, that sounds brilliant. Cheers. I'm just going to, I think Jim Monaghan might have a couple of questions he's wanting to ask.
Yeah, so I think it's for possibly Helen and Jonathan. I was my ex-wife works for sort of libraries and museums down in East Ayrshire, and I was in one of the places she worked, and they had the banner for the local NUM from the miners' strike, and at the same time, I think this is something they have permanently, a Covenanting banner that was from 1679. It was the Battle of Drumclog or something. Which, whatever you think of the religious aspect to it, was very much a kind of working class uprising. And I just wondered, when I saw that, I thought, oh yeah, this tradition's been going on for ages. So made me thinking, I don't know if this is where it comes from. Our banner is a sort of working class reaction to the sort of ruling class, who would sort of march into battle with their banners or their royal regalia, or even way back to probably the Romans marching in with symbolism. Did it evolve from that kind of idea of this is our show of strength? These are our colours.
Who's that?
To Jonathan or Helen, I think they.
It's a great question, Jim. I mean, all I know is that in the studies that I've made of social movements, going all the way back, for instance, to the diggers and the levelers, let's say, in England in the 17th century, they produced illustrated pamphlets. The artworks and texts were crucially important. The first I know of kind of like labor movement, kind of like banners as such, was very much to do, you know, with the rise of trade unionism in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, when, as we know, they become firmly established as part of the kind of like, if you like, the artistic panorama of working class struggle. But certainly if you go, you can Google it yourself, you know, you can look at stuff, the little there is on the Paris Commune, but certainly around the Bolshevik Revolution, it was heavily involved in kind of like artworks. And indeed, I mean, I've spent a lot of my life looking at, for instance, well, here's one here. Oh, he's one of my all-time heroes, a guy called El Lazitsky. These were banners, okay, and they're revolutionary banners, and Mayakovsky wrote the poems for them. I don't know if you can see that, right? But these were posters that were shoved on streets, and some of them actually got blown up big size. So yeah, so in a nutshell, there's a great and long tradition, as Fatima says as well, of kind of like art, posters, pamphleting being an absolutely essential part of any kind of like struggle and protest. And when you were talking about publications, there was one book that I was asked to recommend for Lunt Humphreys, who are an old sort of art house publishers that looks at the photography of street protest, predominantly in London in 1970s. I think it's just come out, like the photography of the street and so on like that. Anyway, yeah. So that sounds like you've given yourself a project, Jim, tracing the history of these things. I think it would be a good one. When does it first appear? I don't know, but what I do know is people have been scribbling on walls and blowing monuments up ever since they blew up Napoleon, and way before that as well. So, you know, yeah.
Just on that point of kind of getting access to things like that, perhaps. I don't know if everybody's aware of the Spirit of Revolt archive. It's based at the Mitchell Library. I work with Spirit of Revolt, but of course haven't been there for a while because we can't get in the building. But their main aim is to scan. They have volunteers scan things and to get it on the website. So like they've got all the, I mean, it's just on cardboard actually. It's just like cardboard boxes, all the stuff from the Free Hetherington. But we did a kind of like, we do a kind of show and tell session in the Mitchell, and just getting all these bits of cardboard out. I mean, that famous drawing of like the hierarchy of capitalism with the workers at the bottom, really beautifully drawn with just crayons on a bit of cardboard. And, you know, that's 10 years ago, and it's this beautiful, amazing artifact. So you can access, you know, that kind of artwork, you know, magazines, early pamphlets, drawings, all sorts of amazing political stuff on that website as well.
Well, talking of which, since we're talking about banners, I don't know if you came across it. I was given it for one of my 60th birthday presents, called Beauty in the Streets. Do you all know that one? Oh, hang on a minute. Stay there, 2 seconds. And during the 1960s political uprisings in Paris, a whole group of art students and so on, and you'll have seen some of them, I'm sure, amazing kind of like very simple kind of silk screens.
Oh, yeah.
That, by the way, make fantastic T-shirts as well. And these were, again, you know, blown up, stuck in the streets and all the rest of it, you know, like very simple. And similar to the role of art and graphics within the Bolshevik Revolution, there's a reason for this. Certainly around the turn of the 20th century, a lot of working class folk weren't that literate. So there was a real reason why these banners and posters dealt with abstract geometry. They were explosive with simple slogans and simple images. Not simple in the sense of they don't, you know, recognizable, let's say, that you could communicate and understand, but images that actually packed kind of like considerable kind of like a content behind what would appear to be. So here, two of my favorites there. There we go.
Yeah, that's just, I love the factory one with the fist. That's a really kind of famous image as well.
I think Helen wants to add something, and also Jim's asking in the comments if Helen had seen banners from before trade unions, how far back does Glasgow Archives go?
I was going to say, I think Fiona can answer the date one better, but I think the early 1830s for our earliest banners, apart from the Covenanting. And I think we actually underestimate just the history we have of Covenanting banners, because they're really rare for banners, and there's so many Covenanting banners in Scotland. It's just special. But there's, before the trade unions, and you've also got religious banners. So in many countries, they're going back centuries. I think a lot of it is about identity, saying this is who we are, this is what we're for. I think I'm going to put in a big plea for Glasgow museums, because we've got an amazing collection and we're holding them for the people of Glasgow. One of the difficulties has been is that people don't know what we have. And we've, I think, now got photographs of most of them. There's work being done to try and get what we can online. It's slow going, but the more we can get online, the more important it is for people to reconnect with them, because quite often, I think the phrase was talked about material culture, and quite often we hold the material culture, but we don't have the context. And that's where I'm putting in a plea to really everybody to sort of engage with the museums and see what of your heritage we have that needs to be more widely known about, and put the people back into it, because just to have the objects without the people is only a small part of the story. And I think Ray was making some really important points about the emotional, seeing the banners, because that was one of the biggest lessons we learned right from the start of Banner Tales, is how much emotion is tied up with them, the memories, the fellow feeling. And I think David mentioned Maggie Sale. She was involved in the anti-nuclear work, and the emotional impact or the emotional toll that took on her life. That's something that's often forgotten about. Seeing things in books, it takes away the people aspect, and struggle is about people. It's about what you want to achieve, how it's achieved, and the cost of achieving it, as well as the benefits of achieving it. But as I say, going right back to the question, I think the 1832, 1834 is the earliest banner that we have. And I think probably Fiona can say a bit more about that.
Just really sort of echo sort of everything Helen said, and going back to the dates of our earliest sort of what we could call, say, sort of protest or people's banners, apart from the Covenantings, which again are really important, I think, you know, if we're looking at people's histories. We do have some banners from looking at the sort of 1830s, of the franchise demonstrations for the vote. And in amongst that, we also do have a pamphlet, which is a list of some of the banners that was out on a march to Glasgow Green in 1831. And one of the things I've actually been able to do while I've been in lockdown is actually sort of transcribe that. And it's amazing, some of the slogans that are on there. They're not, you know, from sort of middle class. They're talking about, you know, the Irish labourers are out there saying, you know, we want a voice. And there's lots of references to the revolution as well. So it's really interesting that sort of small things like that can sort of help reclaim and also put the context in for what we have in the banners. We've one of the banners we know dated roughly to about the 1830s, from the sort of franchise demonstration. And one of the things, interesting things to notice about is the use of the of the weaver symbols, and if we know anything about so you know how important the weavers were, you know, significant, you know, people who really did push you know, working and people's voices forward, and we know this banner was from that. It's not mentioned, it's not written on it, but it's the symbol, because we have the weaver symbol on it. We know it is a weaver's banner. And the other thing is also the use of the cap of liberty on the image of Britannia. So there's really claiming, and there's lots of stuff you can sort of read into that as well. So these are banners that go back to then. And the other thing we do have as well from these marches is the aprons. And it's not something we think of now, but when you really begin to think about it, it's very similar to the use of the wearing t-shirts. A lot from that march in 1831, a lot of people, the men were wearing aprons symbolizing their craft, and they're interesting, but also what they were there marching for, you know, to have a voice. So it's, you know, we have these collections that go back, you know, really to the, you know, early 19th century. And as Helen said, really, what we do really need is actually to put people's voices in there with the artifacts, with the material culture, so that they really speak.
One little thing, Fiona, I think you might have set up a project with Arthur McIver on that point, 10, 15 years ago, who you'll know through the Glasgow Labour History Workshop. And it was just in response to what you're saying, bringing the voices and out, which you're absolutely right. A banner by itself is one thing, but a banner, when you see people carrying it, and if you can hear the voices with it, is something else. And the proposal, we never got funding for it, was to go across the central belt of Scotland, linking a labour history, of course, within the cast iron works, early trade union movement, to actual place. And then as you, for instance, if you're going on the bus or on the train, as you pass through Falkirk, you go ping like that, and you'd get oral history with an image of a workplace and things like that. So you'll know all of this anyway. Things have moved on a long way since we first put that project together. But for instance, the Banners project could be a wonderful vehicle for combining issues to do with oral history, imagery, photographs of crowd scenes, or whatever it is. So in that sense, I think, you know, online work like that has a real role to play, I think, in bringing together these different media and making it, if you like, more live, I guess, you know, is a thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I can see a nice big exhibition, Helen and Fiona. Yeah, that would be brilliant.
We wish.
Yeah, I think, but yes, I mean, I think there's potential to sort of begin to sort of really take the banners out in some way, and that's
yeah, because it's like whenever we do like Doors Open Day, or last year during lockdown, well, it kind of lifted for a bit, so at the deep end, one of the Baths buildings, we had an archive showcase outside. The weather was brilliant, luckily, and we just hung these banners, and it was really nice because we had the Save Our Pool, the council sharks are coming, and then a little along and in the middle of the courtyard we had this new Wellbeing banner, and in between was Gina Dare standing there, who was involved in the one 20 years ago and was involved in the one now, and it was just a really nice kind of image, a frame, that, you know, we're still there, we're still doing projects, we're still trying to imagine our city in a different way, and we're still creating banners for it.
We could have the exhibition in the big baths when we reopen, because that's going to be empty. Wouldn't that be good, or hung from the banisters?
Oh yeah, that would be brilliant. Yeah,
we'll keep
good
talking.
Idea. I'm going to write that down.
There's a question in the comments from Rachel, and I guess it's for Dave Featherstone, which is, does Glasgow University have any plans to document the Glasgow Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah, sorry, the uni or the museum, just so anyone's planning to capture it, I was interested.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. Actually, I don't know of kind of specific plans, but I think it would be definitely kind of worth, I think it's really important to kind of think about. I don't know, and I think also maybe potentially some of the kind of ways we've gone about things with the kind of banner tales kind of thing of kind of drawing together kind of quite informal stories about things might be the kind of sort of way into things that might kind of help kind of capture diverse kind of stories of that. I don't know, Fiona and Helen, have you been collecting stuff around Black Lives Matter?
Yes, yes, we have. It's been a bit sort of strange because of the sort of impact of the pandemic. Our sort of whole usual systems have sort of been really difficult to organize. But yes, we have. We've collected after the protests in Glasgow Green, the Glasgow City Council, when they deemed it necessary to sort of, to move all the banners, all the placards and that, they have been transferred into Glasgow museums. So we now have them, and we will be, hopefully once we can start getting in and on site, photographing them and looking at how we could maybe display them and make them. But yes, they're there. We have, and from that, picked up earlier talking about people's stories and people's histories, is looking at using that maybe as a basis to go out and sort of start recording some of the stories behind what drove, why people were there, why it's that. So that becomes, part of the history. We also have, when the streets were taken, the streets in the city centre we renamed. We have a prototype for one of those street signs that one of my colleagues has collected, and that's becoming part of the museum's collection as well. So yeah, I mean, it's really sort of, in a way, sort of early stages yet. And I was really interested about your murals, because again, that's something I think, maybe at the very least as museums, we should be going out and talking to you about photographing them in site, so there's a record of that in a public collection as well. So yeah, I don't know if Helen wants to add anything about the.
Sorry. I think one thing that struck me with the Black Lives Matter, it's a sign of the times, there's very few banners. A lot of the placards are very much homemade. It's posts with cardboard that's just been written on. And I think this, and actually when they were talking about banners, the Glasgow Museum banner collection is not just the beautifully made trade union ones, that's what people have made at the time. And I think the Black Lives Matters movement, it's showing the feel of the time, the materials, the sustainability and reusing of materials. That there's, as I say, I was going around the first lockdown, I was going around Queen's Park and photographing the different banners. And there were some beautiful ones, and there were some that were very, very direct. And I think this is one, a slightly going from the point, but I think one of the things I found is that where the women were making the banners, they tend to be much more direct, very blunt and to the point. That the messages don't tend to be coded. And I think with Black Lives Matter, some of it's blunt and some of it's coded, that BLM at the moment, everybody knows what it means. Will we know in 50 years' time? And I think some of the imagery we've got to draw out, and we've got to be clear about what we're looking at. So it's going round about the ways. It's going to be difficult material to preserve because it's not meant to last. It was meant to be there for demonstration. It's meant to disintegrate. And I think it's touching on something that Paula was saying. What's been wonderful is how the banners at Govanhill Baths, they were made 20 years ago. They're still being used, they're still relevant. And I thought it's really exciting that they're inspiring new banners. And I think with Black Lives Matter, it's very early stages of the movement. We don't know how that's going to develop. We don't know what the imagery is going to be. We don't know what's going to last in the folklore. Sorry, it's kind of rambling, I'm afraid, but.
No, that's actually, it's great to hear that you guys are already thinking about that, like how sustainable some of the things will be in that, like Fiona was saying, you're already collecting some of the stuff. I did want to mention, so obviously my project had developed quite independently, but there is Wezi Mura, who is the organizer of AfriFest, which is linked to the Edinburgh Film Festival. She designed or curated a Scotland-wide Black Lives Matter mural trail, which is now like 100 murals or something like that. Wow. So there'll need to be somewhere for those murals to go when they get taken down. And I also know one of the pieces of art that she installed was actually those placards that she took from a park in Edinburgh, because that's where she's located. And she took, you know, hundreds of them, and then she installed them at a big church on the main street. Sorry. Yeah, so that's also someone worth considering talking to, I think.
Sorry, what was that trail called, Rachel?
It's called the Black Lives Matter Mural Trail. Yeah, it's designed by Wezi Mura, which is a W-E-Z-I, Wezi Mura. Yeah. So yeah, she just kind of coordinated artists across Scotland, because artists just really wanted to respond to the murder of George Floyd and to Black Lives Matter, and, you know, creatives, they all wanted to do something about it, and she managed to really pull people together. So I linked up with her after I'd started my project for the exact same reasons.
No, I think, like, I'm amazed at these Free Hetherington bits of cardboard that still look brilliant and still say something. You know, if you're looking at that history, like we had this show and tell, someone from the Free Hetherington who was involved came along, and, you know, there's these objects that, you know, tell that story. Things like how to run a meeting. You know, it might seem very simple, but if you've got a group of people, like, knowing who are not there 24/7, it's a non-hierarchical organisation, agreeing on how a meeting should be run, and for that to be written down and still there and accessible, even though it's on cardboard.
Alex Wild had a question in the comments, which is whether there is a protest banner lending library anywhere in Glasgow. Paula, you might know something about that. I don't know of anything, or anything in Scotland more widely. I know about Mayday rooms in London, which I think is similar. But does anyone know whether? Sorry, that's my cat trying to get my attention. But does anyone know whether there is one?
I've never heard of a protest banner lending library. Maybe that's another project that can happen in Govanhill.
She's given an example in the comments of one that exists in the United States. So it is something that does exist, but maybe not locally.
Okay, I'm not sure if anybody else has got anything more that they want to share or discuss.
Just that I would like to remind us all that I'm sure we're all aware that there's going to be a lot of other public facilities, I think, threatened with closure, partly to do with Brexit, partly to do with COVID, partly to do with our own continuing consequences of economic crisis. So, you know, Pollock Shields Library is threatened with closure, and it's a massive, massive issue. And I'm not sure whether Langside, just along from the pool, is going to be open again as well. So we need to be really vigilant about this. I don't know if anyone's got any other news, but someone else mentioned the Pollock Shores pool that I used to know very well. I mean, that was demolished almost overnight behind doors, you know, so we've got to be very, very, very careful. And at the moment, as you probably know, there's a big battle to maintain a presence at the Pollock Shields Library, including putting banners around it. I noticed Fatima's point, they were removed from Queen's Park, and amazingly, they were removed from around the library. I mean, it's incredible. Public library banners made by children going, "We like reading books," were bloody removed by the council. It's quite extraordinary. They've since gone back up again and have been added to. So yeah, it's just if we can keep this little network going and watch these spaces very, very, very carefully, because they're very vulnerable and very fragile. And with all the kind of economic kind of like crisis and the cuts that are undoubtedly coming our way, I think we need to cling on to these. So whether we need another occupation sometime soon to defend the book, united we shall read and united we shall swim.
I'll just say on that, David, that part of the learning that we've done over the 20 years is that we need to help others. And Govanhill Baths has been a bit of a magnet, really, by those wanting support about how to run a campaign and can we give them support. So we printed we printed those posters that you see everywhere for the Pollock Shields Library and others, and we still have a stack. If anyone wants to come and take them and put them around, we'd be more than happy, and they're in the office there. But I just want to say on behalf of Govanhill Baths, I know I'm probably speaking on behalf of Paula there, but what a fantastic meeting this has been. And it's a pity about the low attendance, but I think that's a part of zoomed out folk because of COVID. But we would love to invite all of you back again, hopefully, for the Govanhill Festival, because I think this really deserves, particularly those slides that we saw of the banners and so on, and your ones as well, a bigger audience, and it actually needs us to be in a room together. So hopefully we might be able to see you all again in August with all things going well. Thank you.
That would be great.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, this discussion was meant to take place in the Deep End on May Day last year.
Yeah.
It was organised for May Day, so united. No, I just say thanks to everybody, and I think it is really important on our streets and the importance of the street, especially when all the discussion this week in the UK Parliament about not being allowed to annoy anyone. So I'm not sure how that's going to affect us in Scotland, but certainly
as if the UK Parliament. As if the UK Parliament doesn't do a good job of annoying a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. No, I just, I have to admit, I love being on the street. I would love to just be doing a lot more work on the street, because that's really where you meet people and engage with people. And, you know, I think I'm really happy with everybody who's made it along tonight and really made for a really interesting conversation that's covered a lot of different areas. And just thanks to everybody for coming along, and Catherine for supporting me doing the Zoom stuff. And yeah, definitely let's keep in touch and come to other events if you can come. And you know, there could be lots of different opportunities for collaboration. I'm really interested to hear about your storytelling, Ray. I really like storytelling, so yeah, hopefully there's lots and lots of opportunities for future collaborations.
Yes.
Well, from me, thanks very much. Paula,
from me, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I will see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.